So obviously, when it comes to the London Underground, you've got the classic 11 lines. Then you've got a whole bunch of other railways that go under London but aren't part of the system. And then you've got the most hidden underground railway of all. It's time to go postal. The London Post Office Railway, aka Mail Rail, used to transport the post under the City of London between Paddington and Whitechapel between 1927 and 2003. It was a narrow-gauge electric railway that carried neither passengers nor drivers, which operated 22 hours a day. At one time, it was an essential part of London's communications network, and now it's central London's only heritage railway. As London grew in the 19th and 20th centuries, so too did the problem of traffic. The medieval street layout just couldn't cope with the sheer volume of carts and carriages. By the end of the 19th century, the average speed of traffic was 6 miles per hour, or about the pace of a brisk walk. Not ideal at a time when the vast majority of communications were sent by post. In 1863, the first underground railway opened. This, and the lines that followed, served a useful function as a delivery service. The underground lines had parcels offices at their stations and employed bicycle couriers, and the post office would send mailbags, under supervision. But this could only go so far. Deliveries were limited to what could be crammed into the guard's van. The General Post Office, or GPO, wondered if they could cut out the middleman. Their first experiment with an underground railway was a pneumatic-powered line between Eversholt Street and Euston, kind of a Victorian equivalent of the Hyperloop, if you like. A number of lines were constructed, but the GPO decided that it wasn't economical and so stopped using the whole thing in 1874. They also played with the idea of a really long conveyor belt. In 1906, the Chicago Tunnel Company opened a narrow-gauge goods railway under the streets of Chicago, and this provided the post office with the inspiration they needed. In 1911, the plan was finalised. The line would run from Paddington to Whitechapel, stopping at sorting offices along the way. It also connected with the major railway stations at Paddington and Liverpool Street. The big railways were major conveyors of post and ran dedicated overnight trains for the purpose. One of the clauses in the Act of Parliament authorising the line was that it should never carry passengers, in order to avoid the possibility, however unlikely, of a government organisation competing with the Underground. The line's headquarters and maintenance depot was under Mount Pleasant, at that time the largest sorting office in Britain and one of the largest in the world. Tunnelling began at Paddington Basin in 1914, and it was anticipated that it would take a couple of years to finish. It took rather longer than that, and in fact the line wouldn't be opened for 13 years. The tunnels were constructed in exactly the same way as the deep-level tube lines, dug out using a great head tunnelling shield, then lined with cast-iron segments. Despite the delays, the tunnels were complete enough to be used to store treasures from the British Museum and the National Gallery during the First World War. The railway finally opened on the 3rd of December 1927. It was electrified from the start using a third rail system operating at 440 volts. The trains were driverless. Now, if you're wondering how you run a driverless train before the age of the computer, it's surprisingly simple. An operator at a control panel simply applies an electric current to the track, like on a train set. The line is divided into isolated sections, so multiple trains can be operated on the system at once. As the train passes over a section of track, it kills the current in the section behind it. In the stations themselves, the current drops down to 150 volts to slow the trains down. When a train is being loaded, power is cut off until someone on the platform presses a button to communicate that it's ready to go. The trains themselves are fitted with switches to determine the direction of travel. The system was actually patented by the Post Office in 1914, designed by one Herbert Gunton. In the event of a power cut or breakdown, there were 3 driver-operated, battery-powered locomotives capable of rescuing stranded trains. On the subject of trains, there were 4 generations of rolling stock. The first trains consisted of 4-wheeled motorised cars coupled together in trains of 2 or 3. 90 cars were ordered in total. As with the Underground, they used the American term cars instead of carriages. The line's engineer, Evan Evans... Wait, wasn't that the choirmaster from Ivor the Engine? Anyway, Evan Evans expressed doubts about these early trains. Many of the curves on the line were fearsomely tight, and he thought four-wheeled cars would struggle. And they did. So that was a waste of 90 cars. So as early as 1930, the second generation of trains were introduced. These were articulated, a cargo section on pivots between two functional-looking four-wheeled locomotives. These, like the first generation trains, were built by English Electric and painted green. 3 batches were ordered, 2 arriving in 1930 and 1 arriving in 1936. They were much larger than the 1927 units, so only 50 were ordered. Post was carried in containers on the cargo section, with the destination marked using a system of numbers. In 1965, the third generation, just 2 units, basically just a modernised version of the 1930 units, entered service. And finally, in 1980, 35 new trains were brought in, built by a company with the unlikely name of Greenbat. Services were intense. The line was 6.5 miles long, not including sidings and loop lines. Trains ran every 4 minutes at a speed of approximately 30 to 35 miles per hour. Journey time, if the train stopped at every station, was 26 minutes. At each stop, the staff had literally a minute to load and unload the post from the incoming trains. Then only a brief period of respite before the next one came in. Outgoing post arrived via a chute, incoming post would be sent upstairs via hydraulic lifts. Trains ran for 22 hours a day from Monday to Saturday, with maintenance crammed in around that. Or, let me put it another way, the trains were serviced every 4,000 miles, which they would rack up in just 10 days. A full overhaul was carried out every 2 years, by which time they'd have 100,000 miles on the clock. Bear in mind also that these lines had sharp curves, steep gradients, and heavy loads. It was a truly incredible achievement to keep this lot going. The Second World War saw things slow down somewhat, but like the regular Underground, the Post Office Railway saw use as a shelter, catering to the workers in the sorting offices above. There may have been a war on, but the post still had to get through. In 1965, a new sorting office opened at Rathbone Place, large enough to replace both the Western District Office and the Western Parcels Office, and this necessitated the line being diverted. This diversion was completed in 1958. The railway, like the postal service, saw continual alterations as technology improved, and I'm skipping over an awful lot here. In 1987, in recognition of the 60th anniversary of the system, the whole thing was rebranded Mail Rail, and the trains were repainted in a dynamic red livery. In 1993, finally, computer control was installed. The system operated on 256 kilobytes of memory, or in other words, it wouldn't be able to play even a single one of the shots from this video. But above ground, things had been changing. The post was increasingly sent by road. From 1996, the main line post trains ceased calling at the major central London termini, instead being sent to a new distribution centre in Stonebridge Park. Meanwhile, the sorting offices were being concentrated into fewer, larger centres, preferably next to motorways. And of course, there was far less post. Telephones were almost universal by the 1990s, and the following decade would see the internet become an increasing presence in modern communications. The stations on Mail Rail were closed one by one until by 2003 only 4 remained. It was decided that vans and lorries could carry the post in London more economically. On the 31st of May 2003, Mail Rail was closed. But it was not abandoned. Rather, it was mothballed until they could figure out what to do with it. Trains, track and equipment were left there, ready to be switched back on should the need arise. Various suggestions were put forward. One idea was to turn it into a cycle track, which in such cramped conditions I would imagine would be pretty hellish. Another suggested turning it into a mushroom farm. The one I find most interesting is an idea to turn it into a railway for general freight. Not dissimilar, in fact, to the old Chicago Tunnel Company. Some of the trains found their way into preservation at the National Railway Museum, Buckinghamshire Railway Centre, Amberley Museum, Launceston Steam Railway, and apparently there were some at the Beeches Light Railway, though I don't know what became of those. There was an idea to convert the cars into passenger trains for use on narrow-gauge railways, but that doesn't seem to have come to anything. And what remains is kept on the system. But what actually happened was that the lines in and around Mount Pleasant were turned into a heritage railway under the auspices of the Postal Museum. And for the first time, it was possible for passengers to officially experience the Underground Railway. The service is provided by a pair of battery-powered trains made by Seven Lamb. It has to be said that it's quite a cramped ride, but it's a unique experience that's well worth the trip. These days, things have changed again. The post has undergone a renaissance with the advent of online shopping. Sending things by road in fume-spewing lorries has become less desirable. I find myself wondering whether, had mail rail stuck around just a few years longer, it could have found a new purpose. But that's just me speculating, the way I so often do. For now, let's just say that mail rail has my stamp of approval. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, please do leave a like and subscribe for more. Maybe hit the bell icon to be kept up to date. This probably won't be the last video I do on the Postal Underground Railway. I've had ideas for at least 2 more videos, but we'll see how that goes. I'd like, as always, to thank my donors on Ko-fi and Patreon. You are the containers to my post. And I'll see you all again very soon. Cheerio.